All right, so just start that off. So welcome to our third and last session for our Jewish parenting series. We look forward to being able to offer this in the future. But for today, we're going to speak about discipline. And let me go ahead and just spotlight Elizabeth and my own spots here. So that's in the video. Great. And really this discipline for some of us is not always comfortable. It's I think in general, setting boundaries in relationships, whether those are with our kids or with our spouse or with our friends or community members, that setting boundaries is tough for some of us, for most of us, because how do you set boundaries in a way that also affirms the connection and the love that is already present? And in the Torah, the whole creation of the world, the whole story of the creation of the world is all about setting boundaries. Because you had in the first day, let there be light. That was this incredible expression of unending, kind of no boundary, light aspect of creation. But as we know that the world doesn't just exist in just pure light, the second day and the third day, there were more and more differentiation between the waters separating, between the land, between the different animals and all of that. And that kind of separation, that differentiation is really the setting of boundaries, and it's part of the fabric of creation. In Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, there are these two sides to the tree of life. The one side is chesed, or kindness or love, and the other side is strength or boundaries. And both are part of us and our world, and they're necessary for life to flow. If you look at a river, beautiful water that's flowing in a river, the river only exists because of the boundaries of the channel that's holding the flow of the water to go where it needs to go. If you got rid of that channel or those boundaries, it would suddenly become a lake or an ocean or whatever, and there would be a wider boundary and it would be a different kind of body of water. And as we know, it would also have different purposes and different ability to nourish or not nourish. So when we think about our children, right, if we look at our children and we can see our children as pure love, as pure life, as pure spirit, as this energy that is going on, how do we, discipline is about channeling, just like a river, how we want that energy, that life, to be able to express in a way that that allows them to grow in relationship with other people and develop the kind of values we want, and all of those things. So I think the fundamental piece is, I think we can look at discipline as, yay, an opportunity for us to participate in creation, as opposed to something that that we dread doing, or we have a hard time doing. But really, every time we discipline, we are being a part of the growth of our children in wonderful ways. And so, and our session today will really be about how to feel more confident and have some more tools and ways of thinking about discipline, so that it is something that we can approach with that eagerness. So I'll just kind of continue here, which is that Elizabeth brought this beautiful quote: the difference between a response and a reaction is the breath in between. And that's really what we're shooting for with discipline, and with really everything in relationship, is how do we respond to what's around us, which is really what responsibility is about, the ability to respond rather than react. And I think in parenting, the reaction is our biggest challenge in everything, whether it's discipline or anything else. It's our biggest challenge. And it's our biggest challenge because we were parented in certain ways. We have certain reactions or responses that are almost like psychologically, emotionally hardwired in us, ways in which our parents may have reacted into a certain way, certain things, how they reacted, what they did. That got kind of, those responses and how we dealt with those got kind of laid into our own, psychological, emotional wiring at a very, a very kind of core age in our own development of our personality. So we can find ourselves reacting a lot of the times to our kids in similar ways that our parents reacted to us. Maybe we also even have a reaction that's totally opposite to how our parents reacted to us, specifically because we, for whatever the reason, we don't want to react that way. But the thing that defines a reaction is that it is immediate and it's unconscious a lot of the time. And it is what gets in the way of our mind being able to think about what is happening with our child. Our child does something and we suddenly find the tension and the stress and the blood pressure coming up, or the anger or whatever it is. And that right there will keep us from being able to relate to our child as an I thou. We spoke about this again for those who are just tuning in. Martin Buber, the great 20th century Jewish theologian, drew this talked about relationships, that most of our relationships in life are I-it relationships. We relate to somebody as an object. And we do this even in our most intimate relationships. When somebody, our child, our spouse, is part of our plan, part of what we need to get done, and they need to behave or do X, Y, or Z, in a certain way, then they have become an it in our world. We've ceased in that moment when they are just kind of a pawn in our plan for whatever we have to do. We've ceased in that moment to fully see them and be present with them as a divine expression, as a holy soul in that moment. And certainly when it comes to discipline, when we react with our emotionality, usually in that moment too, we have stopped connecting with our child as a thou, as a full being who's having their own experience of whatever is going on. And instead, in our reaction, it's an I-it. So this piece about taking a breath and being able to be self-aware enough in a moment to recognize I'm reacting, I'm having a reaction, that's the first step to being able to then focus on what are the tools that we can have to discipline and to address the situation. The last thing I'll say about that before we can go on is the sages, the rabbis, have this definition of strength. They ask, Ezehu Gibor, who is strong in Pirkei Avot? And, like somebody would think, is it strong, somebody who's strong intellectually, someone who's strong in body? No, they say the person who's strong is the person who can hold back their reaction, their yetzer, their urge, their desire, whatever that is. Somebody who's able to put a fence around it and hold it in so that a response can happen.
That's great. That's wonderful. So I didn't know this until I was preparing for this class, but the word discipline actually is a derivative of the word disciple, which is really to be, comes from an ancient word, which is to teach. So when we're thinking, discipline sort of has a pejorative connotation. We think of it as it's a negative time in parenting. If you're disciplining your child, it's sort of a unpleasant responsibility. But really, if we can kind of just turn that on its heels and think of discipline as an opportunity to teach. You know, our kids are not hardwired to know what is right and what is wrong. When our babies are little and they're first exploring their world, and they go up and they go to touch the oven, and we say, no, 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 that's hot, you know, and we teach them that it's hot. We really have to kind of approach them with that same patience when they throw sand in the kid's eyes in the sandbox for the first time. We apply all this societal pressure to that, like the child has violated, our child has violated another child, it's possibly embarrassing, they should know better. But really, every time they do something for the first time, it's a learning curve, and it's our job to set those boundaries, to set those limits, and teach them with patience and with love and with empathy, knowing that they don't necessarily know the difference. And then, as obviously as the child develops, we continue to reiterate those boundaries and those limits, sometimes daily, sometimes hourly. But we have to sort of abandon these notions that our children should just know better. It's our job to really teach them. And disciplining is not a moment where we have to come in like the heavy enforcer, but more an opportunity to be the teacher. Let's see here. When we're setting limits, we want to make sure that we are always consistent. That's so important. It's really confusing for children when we are all over the map. We want to be consistent. You want to be clear. You want to be firm. Total, not partial. So for example, if we say, yeah, you and your brother can wrestle so long as you don't hurt your brother. That's not really a clear message to a child. So no, we don't wrestle in the house. That's a clear limit. We want to make sure that it's not left to interpretation. It's really important that our limits are developmentally appropriate. I think that we have to, this is where we have to pause and respond and take that breath and not react, because oftentimes if we just stop to take that breath, we would realize that our child may not even know that they've done wrong. And again, we just have to come in and recognize what their skill sets are. Think about that left brain and right brain that we talked about in the first class. Like, do they even have the capacity to know how to know that this was wrong? We want to make sure we're authoritative, but we're not insulting. So we never want to name call in the moment. We want to take judgment out of the equation. And this one really resonates with me. We want to be specific to the behavior at the moment and not pull in a whole behavioral history. So, you know, our kid has left their scooter out overnight, and it's like, oh, you always leave things out. You never put your things away. I buy you things and you don't take care of them. We're going to really try not to do that when we're setting limits. We're going to be really specific to the moment at hand. And that will help you focus in on the behavior and not label the child. I also just want to sort of mention that if you, particularly with the developmentally appropriate, if you take a moment again, and I'll probably say this so many times, but if we take that breath and we respond as opposed to react, I think what we're really going to see is that we're going to respond to the need in the moment, not just the behavior. So if I just jump back up here real quick, it's our job to really understand that we're not just dealing with the conduct, but we're dealing with the feelings behind the conduct. And it's our responsibility to handle both in that moment. I think if you can stop yourself and take that breath and say, what does my child need right now? There's been a misbehavior, but what's the root cause of that? And try to address both at the same time, you're going to automatically be empathetic. You're automatically going to sort of be able to regulate your emotion and not overreact and not be judgmental. Let's see. Punishments, consequences. What is the difference? They're really big. Rabbi Kavod, did you want to jump in at this point, or
Why don't you do one more slide and then
okay, sounds good. So the difference is huge. The difference is really that a punishment is imposed on the child. There's really no connection between the behavior and the outcome of what we're imposing upon them. As parents, we want to send the message that packs the most punch. And that punishment in the moment may in fact stop the behavior, but it's going to be temporary. It's not going to have a lasting effect because there's not going to be a lesson learned from it. And really, a punishment doesn't in the end teach any accountability for that behavior in the moment. It's just really going to be arbitrary, and it breaks down that connection between parent and child that we've talked about so much over the last 3 weeks. It's going to breed resentment, and the child is really just going to feel anger. They're going to feel violated, as opposed to helping them self-reflect about the behavior at hand. It's just going to become this ugly moment between parent and child. So a punishment is imposed as opposed to the lesson being learned. Did you want to jump in there or keep going?
Do this
I couldn't hear what you said.
Whoops, Siri's talking. Consequences. Consequences have a relatable cause and effect. They're really the result of the choice that was made. So when a child misbehaves, a consequence connects that behavior to the choice that the child made. So I love this. A punishment is something that is done to you. A consequence is something you do to yourself. There's that self-reflection piece that we're helping our kids incorporate at every age. I mean, even toddlers can learn to be self-reflective if the consequence is linked to the behavior. There's no self-reflection in punishment. And it's really our job to help our kids see those natural outcomes of their behavior or their choices. And that's really the basis for accountability, teaching the very basic building blocks for accountability and responsibility later down the road.
Yeah, and this, and it's really important to mention how steeped we are in the idea of punishment, right? I think, where you can see that everything is headed right now is that the necessary boundaries that need to be set to help teach and help a child grow happens through consequences, not punishment, and that those aren't just things in words. That punishment is really something that is about, you did something wrong, and now this is going to happen to you so that you can feel bad about what you did. The idea is that will be a motivation for a change in behavior. And what we see is that that's not a motivation in a change of behavior. It just makes a child feel badly about themselves. When we look in our Torah and we see the way that in the story that God relates to the Israelites, it's a lot of punishment. It's a lot of, you did this and I'm smiting you. It's biblical, as people say, don't get biblical on me. It's biblical. And what's really interesting is that the rabbis really made an effort to interpret those portions of the Torah as consequence, as opposed to punishment. So for instance, there is a section that's part of the 3 paragraphs of the Shema, which is kind of called, it's the second paragraph, it's called the reward and punishment section. And what it is it's basically like, if you do all of these things, if you love God and you live in the reality of the Shema, of God being one and all of these things, then you'll have rain in your proper time, then you'll have all of these that will happen. But if you turn away from God, if you don't do these things, then you're gonna, your food is gonna be cursed and all these bad things are gonna happen to you. And on a very literal reading, it really kind of it's just that it seems reward and punishment based on your obedience or behavior to God. But the way that it gets interpreted by our sages is, no, there is consequences to behavior, right? So in the case of the Shema, this kind of awareness that all of life is one, everything is interconnected, everything is interdependent. If you go ahead and don't act in those ways, if you think that you can just do things for yourself, then there's going to be all of these environmental consequences that are going to happen. And we see this in our world right now with climate change and things that we notice about even the change of our environment as consequences for human behavior. And it's just a cause and effect kind of piece that's going on there, not a punishment. So that's the same way that I think that as we just go ahead and discipline by really using consequences, we are acting just as the rabbis are in trying to reinterpret those sections of Torah, for us, trying to maybe reinterpret those ways in which we might have been raised, or the messages that we have gotten about using punishment to set boundaries. And instead, we transform it into something positive.
Absolutely. I think that's really true. The cause and effect piece is just missing from a punishment, and it's kind of inherent in a consequence, which we're going to see right now. So the 3 types of consequences. The first is natural consequences. I've put a bunch of examples in here. If you forget your jacket, you're going to be cold. Even if, let's take it a step further, I really think you should bring your jacket, or put your jacket on before we walk up to the park. No, I'm good. Right then and there, you could get into a battle of the wills. It could escalate. Like I often say, you can die on that hill, or you can let a natural consequence teach the lesson. And these are beautiful moments. They're hard moments, but they're beautiful moments because you're, as the parent, not really the locus of control in natural consequences. The cause and effect is really doing it for you. So if you forget your lunch, you're going to have, as my kids, when they saw this slide, they said, "Mom, no, it's not string cheese. It's a cup of noodles." I said, "Okay, so you're going to get office lunch." If you forget your PE clothes, you might get a detention.
Elizabeth,
Yeah, sure.
I just want to jump in on this for a second.
Sure.
Which is just, this just happened with Aviv and I the other day. If you forget your jacket, you'll be cold. And I went ahead and he insisted we were going out for a walk. He insisted not. And I said, okay, I'm going to let you just, if you get cold, whatever, you go ahead and do that. It turns out that he was a little cold, but it wasn't a big deal for him. It was more of, and what my reflection was after that was, the reason why I was able to let that go was because my trying to set that boundary for him was not about me having to be in control. And it wasn't about him having to listen to me out of a way of showing respect, and it was really just about what it was you being healthy, not too cold, not whatever. But it's a good thing to really recognize is, do we interpret, does setting boundaries and consequences for our kids, is it about a way of demonstrating a vision that we have of respect for us? Meaning, if you were to really respect me, you would listen to what I had to say. And in this case, if I'm attached to that, I'm not going to be willing to have natural consequences happen, because that's not what it's about for me. It's about that you listen to what I have to say. And that right there is, again, it's not an I thou relationship. It's an I it relationship, which is one of you, the purpose of you as my child is to give me or reinforce my position of authority and my power and my all of those things. And in that case, you're just an it. If I really want to be a thou, then all of these it's not really about me, and it's not about how whether you listen to me or whether you don't. So that feels
No, I
important.
think that is really important. I think you're sort of empowering the child in this moment, and the outcome is going to be a lesson learned or not. Like you said, Aviv wasn't terribly cold. It wasn't that big of a deal. I think that sense of empowerment and natural consequences is so important, and to remove yourself as that authoritative figure is huge. So and in fact, this piece where we don't pile on, let the natural consequence be a lesson in and of itself. Let the consequence have the gravity that it has naturally, without layering on any lecturing, any opinions, any judgment, any further punishment or further imposed consequences. These are again are the building blocks for accountability. If our kids experience some measure of discomfort or displeasure in their natural consequence, that's where the lesson is learned. So it's really important that we don't rush in and fix it. I am certainly guilty of having run a forgotten lunch over to school. I have certainly seen that gym clothes have been left behind and rushed them over to try to save my kiddo from having to have any sort of unpleasant consequence. And every time I do that, I'm robbing my child of a important lesson that's learned. You know your kids best. Some of our kids are extremely sensitive, and falling down and picking themselves up once is enough for them to really get the message. Other kids, they have to fall down a lot of times before the lesson is learned. So you have to really kind of play this one based on their personality and their sensitivity levels, but try so hard not to rush in and fix the moment. So those are natural consequences. We're basically uninvolved. Let's see, logical consequences. This is a situation where a behavior has unpleasant behavior is being exhibited, and there isn't necessarily going to be a natural cause and effect. This is sometimes a consequence that is drafted by the parent, but ideally it's a consequence that a parent and a child, if the child is old enough, can work together to find a solution. I actually like to think of logical consequences as solutions. And if you think of them as problem solving, you're going to move further away from punishment. As you're going to move along that spectrum and get further away from punishment, because punishment, it like this says, you can think that you're the architect of a consequence when really it is in fact just a punishment. So if you're working towards a solution together, typically that's not going to land you in the punishment arena. So for example, your child leaves all their Legos out after many reminders of asking to clean them up, and you have stepped on them barefoot more times than you'd like to, and it's unpleasant and it's a mess, and you've told them many times and they've gotten their warnings. Okay, so you sit your kiddo down and you say, I've asked you several times to clean up your Legos. You haven't done it. what do you think should happen next? And you might have a child who says, well, I'll sit and I'll clean them up right now. And, or you might have a child that sort of shrugs and looks at you like, okay, you tell me. Take their lead. If you can come up with a solution together that's reasonable, great. If they're going to throw their hands up in the air, then you're going to have to be the architect of that solution. And you can decide, you know, use this RSVP model to decide, like, is this reasonable? Is it simple? Is it going to teach the lesson? Is it purposeful? If it's not, then it's probably a punishment. And remember, we don't have to, solutions don't have to, you know, be heavy hitting in order for a lesson to be learned. So it could be as simple as, yeah, you're gonna clean up your Legos, and we're gonna find a way that this doesn't continually become a problem. So next time when you take out your Legos, what if we set a timer? And if the timer goes off, it's time to clean up the Legos. Or we'll set a timer for how long it takes you to clean up the Legos. Or let's find a new area so that if you do spread out with your Legos, it's not such an issue, because I'm not going to step on them back and forth in the kitchen. Work together, find a solution. Again, it doesn't have to be so heavy hitting that it's like, you know, gonna once and for all solve the problem. Does anyone, I just wanted to pause right here. Does anyone have any examples of like chronic issues that they're having with their child that they would love a little brainstorm on a logical consequence? Oh, hi, Jen. Sure.
Well, mine is with my older one who is 12 and has an iPhone and has an Xbox and is doing school at home 3 days a week. So it's trying to, you know, navigate and say, okay, you know, you were online all day and now I know you want to play your video game, but, you know, we need to like not playing it so much. Oh, my friends all play as much as I do. And, you know, and I just become exhausted from even arguing. So I just stop and I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. Or I end up screaming and taking it away. And then that causes more, you know, more problem. My little one isn't so much problem. He'll kind of just do whatever. He'll want to watch his TV or just go play Legos, and it's much easier.
Yeah, it's hard. This one's really hard. I've walked a mile in your shoes because they're connecting virtually right now, and you feel that if you don't allow them the opportunity to connect over Xbox or phone, then you're actually punishing them because they're not, that's their social outlet too. So in this instance, I would work with him and like together be the architects of a plan and say, okay, how about on the days that you do online school, because you've been staring into a screen for X amount of hours, let's come up with a reasonable plan for you to still be able to connect with your friends in an unstructured way, whether it's over the phone or over the Xbox, but doesn't feel like it's so much that, you know, we're permanently, the line I use in my house is, I think you've permanently changed the pathways in your brain because you've done so much screen time. So work together, come up with, you know, set those limits, create those boundaries. I would work with him so he doesn't feel that this is just being imposed upon him and it's unfair and you don't understand and all those things. If he's part of that process, he's going to be much more willing to follow it, right? And, you know, just kind of create something that becomes the boundary. It becomes the plan that you're going to follow, and try not to deviate from it. And that's where I've gotten into trouble in this very specific matter. It's like, okay, we've set up the plan, we have the boundary set, and then, oh, but there's a new download. And even though I'm not supposed to go on right now, they're all on. You're going to have to actually work all those variables into your plan preemptively. So think about all those moments that could thwart the plan and try to work them in as you're kind of creating it with him. I don't know if that helps.
I want to add something to that too, because it's also my reality and my story here too. You know, I think first of all, in any kind of putting in, you want to be able to understand where his behavior is coming from and let him know that. So in this case, you probably do. Some other situations you may need to ask, but in this case, you know that after a really whatever boring day at school, whatever the experience is, that it's really important for him to be able to connect with his friends and do and you want to support him in that. It's important for you to be able to clarify what is your concern. Why can't he just play video games? It is your concern about him getting his homework done. Well, what if he goes ahead and gets his homework done? Then can he play video games all night? At least for us, if I was in your shoes, which I am, the concern really is that I know for my kids' own healthy, thriving, and growing, that they need to not be out on the screen all the time, even though it's something that they enjoy. They need to use their bodies, they need to do whatever. So that's where you can also come back and see, look, I know as your parent that there are other things that you need for your own healthy being. You need to be able to use your body. You need to be able to go ahead and do so I want us to find a solution so that you can hear the things that are important to me and get these done, and also be able to do what's important to you. And that's where I think Elizabeth's framed it really nicely of, see if you can come into that problem solving together and figuring that out. And really what it is you're sharing with him, Jen, is that what's important to him is important to you. This isn't like a battle of wills. It's you want to find a solution that allows him to have some time playing with his friends, but your needs and what's important to you is equally important on the table. And he's going to need, and you guys are going to need to come up with a solution that meets, both of those things. I mean, once you have created and set whatever those boundaries are, then there's the question of, how does it get honored? What happens when it doesn't get honored? How do you begin to set those things? And I'll just say, there is pieces where, if you have kids that are going on that are playing games during class time, if you're having kids that you have the rule that you do your homework first and they're going ahead and getting online first and not doing that, then there's going to need to be some consequences that are going to basically say that, what is it going to mean? Is it going to be, what's going to be a relatable kind of thing? Well, it seems like, your desire to be online, that you don't have your own self-control to be able to honor the boundaries that we talked about. So we're going to remove this for a week. You're not going to be able to do this online for a week. And, please, and because you're not able to do it yourself. So I'm gonna set this boundary to help you.
Mm-hmm. I love that need piece. Sorry, Jen, I interrupted you.
Oh, no, I said thank you. I got it.
Oh, okay. I love that need piece. I know that's one of the tent poles in nonviolent communication. You actually start with when you're dealing with a misbehavior, you actually start with your own need and say, I'm really worried, or I'm really concerned about X, Y, or Z. So, and I know that in this specific matter, I have really struggled. Anyone who's got school-age kids with any access to devices, this has been a really tough year for that. And I feel like we could have a whole class just on this topic. But yeah, I think that piece of honoring his need and then explaining your need is just so key. I thank you, Kavod. It helps me too. Okay, so let's move on to, oh yeah.
Sorry, let's just take one more. We have a lot of material, but I want to make sure, Jennifer Henderson, you also.
Sorry, I didn't mean to leave anybody out there.
Thanks. No, I was just going to say, we struggle with that one in our house too, with the screen time, and my son and one of Jen's kids are the same age. And it's hard because we used to have a hard and fast rule on screen time in this house prior to March 13th, 20, whatever year yesterday was, last year, 2020. And it was easy and it was simple. But now the screen is the way that he sees his grandparents, because we're still social distancing to that degree. And the screen is the way that he sees his school friends that he's just met, that, you know, he's never had physical play dates with, and some of their family are strictly social distancing. So it's his only connection to some places. And then, you know, to tie it with the temple, he has his Shabbat high through the screen, which we appreciate is being offered as an option virtually. But it's, you know, everything goes back to the screen. And then dad plays games on the screens. So he sees dad playing games that he wants to play. And it's, well, you guys are on the screens. And so what we're starting, we're in the middle of trying to figure out how to, I don't know if manage is the right word, but it's the one we use around here. Anytime he's talking to grandparents, if it's on a screen, just doesn't count. Like when I grew up, Sesame Street didn't count. Mr. Rogers didn't count. Anything that's talking to a grandparent, if it's on the phone, cool. If you choose to FaceTime with them, great. It just doesn't count. That's free and clear. You can play a game with grandma for an hour through the computer for all we care. Face to face on the computer, not, did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Anything that's school obviously doesn't count. And he's in school half day. So which is why I have an early pickup. But then the second half of his day, the curriculum's online. So it's a little tricky to balance it. Like he has a music class that he can take, but it's through the screen and it's online. Yeah. So that doesn't count in his allotment. But again, development wise, we're not blind to the fact that it's more screen time. But what we're starting to do in our house is, and I have to make them, we haven't done it yet, but we talked about it and he was part of the plan. He actually told us that it's easier for him if we say, you need to stop now, as opposed to let me know when you finish that game. Because then he doesn't want to stop. So he'll try to stretch that game or whatever he's doing. But if we say, you need to stop. And he actually asked us for a timer to tell him 2 minutes, put it on the iPhone, put it right in front of him, show him a timer that he can see. And he said that helps him. So we tried to partner with him on that. Like you were saying, I'll let you know in a couple of weeks if it works, but that's where we're headed. And then we came up with an idea of how much time he gets to do his free stuff on the computer or any screen. And he's going to get coupons that are broken down into smaller segments. So if he wants to do it 10 minutes at a time, if he wants to do it 30 minutes at a time, and when he's done with his coupons for the day, that was his choice and they're gone. And they can't be used right before bedtime, like the 30 minutes before bed. That's what we've come up with. We haven't put it in place yet. I thought I'd throw that out there to see if we're down the right path or if anybody else likes those ideas or just to move on to the next topic. But I just wanted to share. That's kind of where we've gotten to because we struggle with it so much as well.
Thank you, Jennifer.
The one, I think it's brilliant. Oops, we lost you.
No, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I couldn't hear. I think that's brilliant. I think the best part about that, and it's always going to be a little custom or tailor-made to each family, but I think as long as you're actually working together, I think that's probably the key piece. And you're just bound to be more successful if you're both involved, both parties are involved. So illogical consequences, these are sort of the things that we just tend to grasp for really quickly. Food and dessert, like if you don't clean up your toys, you don't get dessert. Again, there's no correlation between cleaning up toys and dessert. No lesson learned. And in fact, just to add a little note to food, I really, really try to discourage parents from ever going to the food well, because I think, food is a bit of an issue, and you don't want to create negative connotations around food. I think particularly for girls, it becomes charged in different ways. So you don't want food to really be a reward or a punishment for that matter. Certainly there's times where my 7-year-old and I, we have sort of a standing date. We go to swimming lessons on Saturday mornings, and then afterwards we hit the bakery and get a donut. You know, is that a reward? Not really. I try to really not say, hey, you get a donut because you had such a great swimming lesson. I try to focus on the time together. You know, it's a special treat, not the donut per se, but the time together to have that moment together. Whether he, you know, no matter what kind of swimming lesson he's had, and sometimes he's a better listener than others, so he still gets to have that special moment with me. So just be mindful of food. Technology and TV, that's certainly one that I grasp for a lot, and I have to keep that in check. You know, just on the subject, because we're all struggling with screen time, you really just want to make sure that if the issue is screen time, then the consequence will probably involve a remediation of that screen time. But you don't want to say, hey, we don't hit our brother and then you lost your screen time, or you're not listening to me, therefore you don't get to watch TV later. It has to be, if we're using that as the consequence, it has to be the misbehavior has to be related to it. And again, try not to punish yourself or your whole family by overreaching and making the consequence be a special time you had planned coming up, or somebody's birthday party you were going to attend, or a play date that was coming up. Those are, again, just typically they have nothing to do with the misbehavior that, you know, occurred. So there's just no connection there.
And it's really important to state that this is really hard. This is really difficult.
It is hard.
I mean, that what's difficult is when I think about for myself why I put illogical consequences in, is because it's a way to assert power. And I don't mean that, it's not because I'm like power hungry or anything like that, but it's that we're trying to run a household and our kids are, you know, we need them to do something or to stop doing something. And it's so easy to look at what's the thing that they care about and use that in order to try to change their behavior. And, you know, we can get in trouble with this too. A lot of the time, I know I can find myself saying in the middle, you know, I need a child to stop a behavior because it's escalating everything in the house and everything is kind of going up. And it's like, you know, if you don't stop this right now, you're not going to get to watch the video later today. Like, I know that that's what they're looking forward to. And I know that that's an instant way to get it done, you know, to get it. But then they go ahead and do whatever they're going to do. And, you know, and then I have to follow through, but it's illogical. And it's not, what, again, I think this quote from Chaim Janat is so wonderful, as it says that punishment doesn't deter misconduct. It makes the offender more skillful in escaping detection. And if you really think about that, it's so, and think about that in your own growing up too, you know, is, you know, how much it was, because the child is not invested in the reasoning or you're setting a consequence for something or a boundary because of their own development, their own growth, their own, all of those things. And if that's going to be effective, at some point they need to be able to see the logic in it and be able to own it for themselves, whatever the value is that you're trying to teach them. And if the consequences is a punishment that has no real inherent value for themselves, then why wouldn't I just do what I could to avoid detection and do what I want to do? You know, even though I know that I should listen to what my parents have to say.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes practice. I remember when I really switched the paradigm from going for that, you know, that trump card moment, like, okay, I'm going to take the thing that matters most, to really making logical consequences. I think I was you get better at it over time. You know, it takes practice. And here are the important things to remember when you're doing it. You can stop the behavior if it's something that needs to be stopped immediately, and take a moment to formulate the consequence. It doesn't have to be something that you pull out right away and, you know, throw out there. In fact, and I think we talked about this last week with communication, it's so okay. It's perfectly okay as parents for us to say, I need you to stop. And if they don't stop, you can say, you know, I need you to stop. I'm not sure what's going to happen if you don't. I'm going to think about that for a moment. And, you know, you can take a pause to sort of work together even to find that solution. You don't have to grasp for something. And we were just sort of touching upon these things like work together, don't go too big, birthday parties or family outings. Once you do put that consequence out there, like Rabbi Kavod was saying, you don't get your video. Well, even if it wasn't the right consequence, even if you regret sort of saying it, I think you got to follow through with it, because if you don't, that becomes a new point at which there's that breakdown between you and your child. So if they can't trust that they know what you've said is going to happen, then you've really kind of lost the foundation to everything in your communication. So even if you realize, oh, I overreached, or I wish I hadn't chosen this as a consequence, I think you got to see it through. You can even potentially, you know, moderate it somehow or adjust it, but you've got to at least get there, or else, you know, you sort of lost all your credibility. It's really important for kiddos under the age of 2. They're just not developmentally ready for consequences. Everything between the ages of 0 and 2 is a teachable moment. You know, I think that you are just, you know, truly giving them, you know, presenting the world to them moment by moment. So it's not really, if there's a consequence, let's say with a really young child, it's going to be immediate. It's going to be like, okay, we can't throw that. I'm going to take that away from you, but here's something you can throw, you know, and kind of go from there. I want to pop into timeouts because I know we're running out of time. And timeouts, you know, it's just arbitrary. It really falls under the umbrella of punishment. It isolates a child. It shames a child. And while it may stop the behavior because you're physically removing them from what they're doing, again, there's no correlation, there's no lesson learned. The only time a timeout is really appropriate is when the intention is to give them a break. They need to, you know, sometimes I'll see, particularly with Lego building, you know, the frustration, they can't get something to work. The frustration is rising to the point where like the thing gets chucked across the room. That's when you can say, you know what, let's take a break. Let's take a break and let's calm down, and then we'll come back to it. And it's not really a physical removal as a punishment so much as it is, let's come back renewed and refreshed. And that's when timeouts serve a purpose. There are times where a child's behavior is not desirable, and you do have to remove yourself from a group, a birthday party, a class, a circle time. Again, you're not banishing them alone. You're in there with them. You're hanging in there with them. It's like, we're going to take a break because I don't like the way that, you know, we don't hit other children. We're going to take a break. We're going to step out into the hallway and we're going to take a couple breaths, and you'll have a conversation with them, and then we'll try again. Again, they're not sitting in a chair for a number of minutes based on however old they are, or, you know, whatever the paradigm for timeouts are.
And they're part of being able to decide when to go back, because
absolutely,
it's not a fixed period of time. It's just, you know, what's necessary for the break until they can calm down. And it can be, you know, are you ready to go back now? Yes. It's not, you know, it's not the way that we usually think about timeouts.
Exactly. Tips for success. Again, we talked about this in the very first class. We're going to front load as much as possible. If we can set that expectation ahead of time in a neutral moment, when we're not, when the stakes are not high, we're going to have a much better outcome. This is one of my favorite little tips. This is a Betsy Braun. I know Jen knows her well. She's a behavioralist who was in education for many years. And she says, you know what, in a moment when you can let somebody else be the heavy, let them be the heavy. We do this all day long with our kids, right? We have to be the bearer of bad news, tell them they can't do this, tell them they can't do that, take this away, you know, constantly enforce rules and boundaries. If there's an opportunity to let somebody else take on that role, it's really powerful. So, you know, the other day, Thomas wanted to take something to school that I knew wasn't allowed. And I thought, you know, I can get into a battle of the wills about whether or not he should take this in his backpack to school. But instead, I said, you know what? Fine, take it. But when you get to school, before school starts and you're just getting settled in your classroom, I want you to ask your teacher if it's allowed. And, you know, of course, I knew what the answer was going to be. So, but I kind of removed myself as the locus of control. Start with a yes and then a no, particularly with little ones. If you're going to tell them they can't do something, start with what they can do, because children tend to focus on the positive. They try to kind of cling to it. So if they're jumping on the sofa and you don't want them to jump on the sofa, you can validate them and say, I can see you really, your body really wants to jump right now. Let's go outside and jump outside because it's not safe to jump on the sofa. So start with that yes, and then get to the no. And then lousy local conditions. This is another Betsy Braun wonderful idiom. You know, hungry, angry, tired, lonely, at the end of a school day, we've taken our kiddos on one too many errands, whatever the situation is. There are times where they're just cooked, they're done, and they're going to misbehave because they're hungry and they're exhausted. And that is not the time to make it a teachable moment. That's when you just kind of, it's a survival moment. You get through it as best you can with as much compassion and empathy as you can for your child who's just been pushed a little too far, but not a time to discipline. So just try to really tuck that one away. I don't know if anyone's familiar with these Mo Willems books. He's one of our favorite child authors, but this book, Knuffle Bunny, it's about his daughter Trixie, who they go to the laundromat in New York City, and she brings Knuffle Bunny, which is her stuffed animal bunny, with her, and her, you know, total transitional object. I mean, she's very, Knuffle Bunny is her world. And Knuffle Bunny ends up in the washing machine, and halfway back to the apartment on their walk home, she realizes that she doesn't have Knuffle Bunny, and she goes into like this DEFCON 4 tantrum. And the author Mo Willems does a great job of illustrating, and like the words are great. And at one point he says, Trixie went boneless. And I love that, because there's so many times in our moments, days as parents, where we are going to have to physically handle our kids. They sometimes, I mean, how many times have I stood at the side of the car and had to literally wrestle a toddler into a car seat? I mean, my knee on the chest, my, you know, pushing their arms through the straps. It happens. I mean, sometimes they just grow roots right where they stand and they will not budge. And you do have to physically handle them. But here's the trick. The key is, and this is really what it's all about, is you have to stay neutral. So these are some of my favorite ways of staying calm, staying neutral, and sort of getting the outcome you want. So, you know, can you walk yourself to the car, or should I pick you up and take you there? or I can see you're really too upset to use your own legs to walk right now, so I'm going to pick you up and take you. Again, super neutral, validating that they're in a bad place. I can see you're so angry you're too angry to walk. Should I move your body, or would you like to move your own body? This is one that I saw in Mommy and Me all the time. I mean, kids snatch toys from each other left and right. It's perfectly developmentally appropriate. But, again, do you want to give the toy back, or should I give the toy back? Sometimes we have to, sometimes they're not going to give the toy back. And that's when you sort of have to physically handle them. But you gave them the opportunity and you empowered them with the choice. So, stay neutral, try to phrase those moments as a question, particularly with our little ones. They're so in a stage, toddlerdom is all about, I can do it myself, right? So if you can give them the opportunity to say that they can do it themselves, you might get the outcome that you're looking for. They're so stubborn about doing things themselves that will trump, the like, I'm not going to walk mode, and they might just get up and comply. So any questions about that, or do you want to add to those?
I'm just going to say really quick, like with what you just said about staying neutral. I remember learning that, I don't know if you knew baby group Donna Halloran in LA.
Yep,
yeah,
sure.
So I did her classes, and it was always like, give the child a choice. It's going to be the easy way or the hard way. Do I need to carry you to the car, or are you going to walk? Would you like to wear your red pants or your blue pants? Like, that's the choice we have to make here, So I totally agree with you saying that. So thank you for reiterating it, because I forget about that all the time. And I just get, angry. Like, we have to do it now, like my way, no way. So thank you for reiterating that.
Right there, Jen, that's where we've been coming back to this theme from Martin Buber throughout these classes, which is the I, it versus the I, thou. And even in these moments of having to be physical with our kids, our anger or the way that we don't want to be is always coming from an I, it, because the kid is not complying. They're not going with the program and whatever that is. And it's our frustration in that moment of them being the object in our program, as opposed to being able to recognize that they're a whole person with their own needs and their own reality. And how do we set those boundaries physically in that way that honors that they may have a different need in that? And that's where the more that we can continue to focus on I, thou, on seeing and looking for the divine in our children, the more that we will be able to stay neutral on all of this. And, just to close, because I'm aware we are over time, but just to close, Elizabeth and I really, with all of these are some tools, some ways to think about it. These are all aspirational, meaning that we know that this is what works. And yet the reality is that in a moment of stress, in a moment of busyness, we can't, it's sometimes too much to apply these things. Good discipline is inconvenient, right? It takes the opportunity in the moment to be creative, to be thoughtful about everything that we're saying, takes the moment to really think about what's the appropriate piece to move through, to involve our children in the conversation, to, instead of being across the room, to actually get down like we were talking before in past class and look at them in the eyes. It's all things that means we have to stop in the moment and find kind of where our center is and go ahead and do it. And I know for myself, I go the opposite direction in moments of stress, in moments when things are a lot. And sometimes it's just we got just too much going on. We can't put this into practice all of the time. And so I just want to put that as a thing for all of us. We continue to reach towards this. We hopefully can do this a little bit more than we did before, and continue to know that this is the path. And yet we're human, imperfect people doing the best. And ultimately, it really is the the love and the care that we have for our kids that will continue to be transmitted, even if we do it imperfectly.
It's a practice. You said that very early on, Kavod. It's a practice, and it certainly is. And here's the great news: is every opportunity is a chance to do it a little better, a little differently, and just all these discussions have kind of brought it all into focus for all of us, which is great.
Thank you, everybody. Great to.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I hope
you
you're
for
going to